At 8 years old, Fatima didn't understand what marriage meant. She didn't know what it felt like to have her life planned out for her, every choice dictated by someone else. But on the day her father, Musa, told her that she was going to be married to Sheikh Yusuf, she felt a knot form in her stomach. A feeling she couldn't name but knew deep down was the beginning of the end of everything she knew. It wasn't that her father was cruel. He loved her in his own way. He was stern, serious, a man of faith, and a figure of authority in the village. But in his eyes, a daughter was never meant to have a life of her own. She was meant to be obedient, to serve, to bring honor to the family. And so when the Sheikh, a powerful man respected by all, chose her to be his bride, her father saw it as an opportunity, not a burden. "It's an honor, Fatima," her father had said that day, his voice steady, though there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Was it fear? Was it sadness? Fatima couldn't tell. "You will be the Sheikh's wife. He is a man of great influence. You will be well cared for." But Fatima didn't care for influence or wealth. She didn't care about honor or power. She cared about the world she knew, her home, the smell of her mother's cooking, the soft laughter of her younger siblings. She cared about her childhood, something her father had decided wasn't for her anymore. She was no longer his little girl. That night, Fatima cried herself to sleep, her small body trembling under the weight of the silk wedding dress she had been forced to wear. Her mother, sitting silently beside her, had not said a word. She had simply brushed Fatima's hair and smoothed the dress, her hands cold and practiced, as though this was something she had done 1,000 times before. Fatima knew her mother's silence. It was the silence of women who had long ago learned not to fight, not to question, not to dream. It was the silence of submission. And it was that silence that made Fatima's heart break. The day of the wedding arrived faster than Fatima could have imagined. Sheikh Yusuf, at 42, was a towering figure in the village, a man who owned the land, the homes, the very air they breathed. His wealth and power were undeniable, but it was his arrogance that Fatima would come to know best. He never looked at her with kindness or affection. He saw her only as a possession. At the wedding, there were too many strangers. Fatima couldn't understand the words they spoke, couldn't understand the rituals. They dressed her in layers of heavy red silk, her tiny frame swallowed by the fabric. Her feet didn't touch the ground as they carried her to the bedchamber, where the rest of the women sang songs about purity and obedience. But Fatima felt none of it. She felt alone, empty, drowning in the weight of expectations. She was led into the room where Sheikh Yusuf waited for her. He was already seated on the bed, his eyes scanning her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. His hands rested on his knees, his fingers tapping impatiently. "You're late," he said, his voice cold, without a trace of tenderness. Fatima said nothing. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't even know if she should respond. He looked at her again, his gaze lingering on her face, studying it as if she were an object he had just bought. She felt herself shrink under his stare. She wasn't a person in his eyes. She was something to be used, something to be controlled. The room felt too small, the air too thick. She walked to the side of the bed, trying to keep her hands from shaking, trying to hold herself together. Sheikh Yusuf didn't speak again. Instead, he reached out and grabbed her arm, his grip harsh and possessive. Fatima winced, but she didn't scream. She had learned long ago that screaming wasn't an option. Screaming meant weakness. Screaming meant rebellion. The first time he touched her, she wanted to pull away, but there was no space to run. There was nowhere to hide. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her body went cold. She thought she might die from the pressure of it all. But in the stillness of that room, Fatima was silent. She remained still as Sheikh Yusuf took what was his by right, by tradition. She was nothing more than a possession in his eyes, and for the first time, Fatima understood what it meant to lose everything, to be seen as less than human. The pain was unbearable, but she swallowed it, buried it deep inside her. There was no room for it to surface. There was only duty, only silence. Days turned into weeks, and Fatima's world became a blur of dark corners, heavy silks, and suffocating silence. Sheikh Yusuf did not speak to her unless it was to demand something. He didn't ask her how she felt. He didn't care. He came home from the mosque, removed his shoes, and expected her to serve him, to meet his needs, to be a wife, a mother, but never a person. Fatima tried to speak once, to ask if she could go outside, to see the sun, to breathe in the fresh air. But the words died in her throat, as she saw Sheikh Yusuf's eyes narrow. She had learned quickly that asking for anything was asking for rebellion. So she stayed quiet, her voice choked by the weight of the house, the weight of his gaze. Her body grew tired, her hands were raw from scrubbing the floors, her back aching from carrying water from the well. The nights were the hardest. She knew what awaited her. It was always the same. Sheikh Yusuf would return, and she would be expected to fulfill her duties. There was no love in those moments, only duty, obedience. Fatima's body had been taught to shut down, to not feel, to not speak. But despite the silence, despite the growing numbness in her chest, something inside Fatima still stirred. A longing, a desperate, aching need for something more than this life. One evening, when Fatima was alone in the courtyard, her body swollen with the child growing inside her, she felt it, a sharp, stabbing pain in her abdomen. It came out of nowhere, an ache so intense it made her legs buckle beneath her. She tried to steady herself, but the pain only grew worse, coming in waves that left her gasping for air. She fell to her knees, clutching her stomach. She couldn't scream, she couldn't move. The world seemed to spin around her. She was alone. In that moment, Fatima knew she was dying. But even as her vision blurred, even as her strength faded, there was something she knew. She was not ready to die. Not like this. Not before she had the chance to make her own choice, to feel the freedom she had only dreamed about. She wasn't ready to let him take everything from her. But she couldn't fight the pain. She couldn't escape the prison she had been locked in. She was a prisoner, a possession, a wife, and she almost died that night. Fatima's body was broken. The pain had been unlike anything she had ever known. It was as if her very being had been ripped apart. She had lost so much blood, her vision had blurred, her limbs numb, and her heart had felt like it was pounding out of her chest with no way to stop it. The world around her seemed to fade as the midwives hovered over her, voices muffled, and the sharp scent of blood filling the air. But somehow she had survived. The pain was still there, lingering, but Fatima's spirit had cracked open that night in a way she hadn't known was possible. She knew what it meant to have her body sacrificed, to give her life away for someone else's comfort, to give birth to a child that, even at 13, she wasn't ready for, to be expected to endure without question. The day after she almost died, Fatima awoke in a haze. The room around her was dark, only a few slivers of light sneaking through the cracks in the wooden walls. She was in the Sheikh's chambers, tucked in the bed she had been forced to share with him. Her body ached in ways she couldn't describe, and her stomach was swollen with the weight of the child she had given birth to. She couldn't remember much of the birth, but she remembered the fear, the terror, the helplessness. She remembered the hands of the midwives, the coldness of the room, and the silence of the house once they all left her alone. Fatima turned her head, her eyes struggling to focus, and there, standing in the doorway, was Sheikh Yusuf. He was wearing his usual expression, one that gave nothing away, no emotion, no care, just his presence. He looked at her like she was nothing more than a piece of property, an object in his life that needed to be taken care of. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice cold, detached. Fatima swallowed, the pain in her throat cutting through the fog. She had almost died, yet his concern wasn't for her body, her well-being, her life. No, it was simply whether or not she had fulfilled her duty. "I'm fine," she whispered, not because she was, but because she had learned not to complain, not to ask for anything more than the bare minimum. "Good," he said, turning on his heel to leave, his back to her. "You'll need your strength for the child." Fatima didn't respond. She couldn't. She couldn't say anything anymore. Her voice had been stolen from her long before the birth. She had long stopped believing that anyone would care enough to listen. Days passed, and the pain of childbirth became part of the routine. Fatima's body was still healing, but the world around her didn't stop. She had to take care of the baby. She had to cook and clean. She had to serve Sheikh Yusuf. Every task she did was expected. Her worth was in how much she could endure without complaining, and she had learned well. But it wasn't just the physical labor that weighed on her. It was the silence of her existence. She was invisible to the world, a child forced to raise a child, a woman forced to be a wife before she had even reached the age of reason. She looked at the baby in her arms, a small girl with wide eyes, her tiny hands grasping at the air. Zara, Fatima's daughter, the only bright spark in her otherwise dark existence. Fatima loved Zara, but the love was different from what she had imagined as a child. It wasn't the innocent kind of love where you hold your baby and dream of their future. No, Fatima's love for Zara was protective, suffocating, full of fear. Fear of what the future would hold for her daughter. Would Zara live the same life? Would she be forced to marry before she understood what love even meant? Fatima couldn't bear the thought. One afternoon, Fatima sat alone in the small courtyard behind the house. The sun was high, the heat of the desert making the air heavy, but for the first time in weeks, Fatima felt a small glimmer of something else. The weight of submission that had felt so suffocating for so long felt a little lighter. She could still feel the pull of the chains around her, the expectations, the duties, the fears. But somehow she found herself longing for more than just survival. She wanted freedom. She wanted choice. She wanted to breathe again. That was when Layla came to sit beside her. Layla, still young and terrified, just a few years older than Fatima had been when she was sold into this life, quietly settled next to her. Layla's hands were shaking, and she didn't speak right away. The two women sat together in the silence of the courtyard, each lost in their own thoughts. Fatima looked at Layla, the look in her eyes one of shared understanding. They had both been caught in the same trap, trapped by tradition, by the cruelty of men who saw them only as objects to be controlled. "I can't keep living like this," Layla whispered, her voice shaking, barely audible. Fatima's heart broke at the sound. She had heard these words in her own heart for so long. It was a cry for help, for hope, for a life that didn't revolve around obedience and silence. "I know," Fatima whispered back, her voice raw from the weeks of silence. "But we don't have a choice, do we?" Layla shook her head. "I don't want this for my life. But what can we do? They'll find us. Sheikh Yusuf will find us." Fatima's gaze hardened. She had heard those words too many times. "They will find us," they said. And yet, despite the fear that consumed her, Fatima felt something else rising inside her. Could she run? Could she escape this life, this man? Could she take Zara with her? "No," Fatima said firmly, her voice growing stronger. "We don't have to stay. We have a choice." Layla looked at her, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You think we can escape? Fatima, you're talking about running from the Sheikh. He controls everything. He controls us." "I know," Fatima replied, her heart pounding in her chest. "But I can't live like this anymore. I have to try, and I'll take you with me if you want. I won't leave you here." Layla bit her lip, uncertainty and fear written all over her face. But Fatima could see it, the spark of something that hadn't been there before, the spark of hope. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Fatima and Layla made a pact. They would escape. It wasn't a plan yet. There were no clear answers, but Fatima knew one thing. She wasn't going to let her life slip away quietly. She would fight for Zara, for herself, for Layla. She didn't know how it would happen, but the first step was deciding that freedom was worth the risk. But escaping wouldn't be easy. Sheikh Yusuf had eyes everywhere. He had power, influence, and the law on his side. Fatima had nothing but her will, and the truth that had slowly been revealed to her, that she didn't have to live like this. She didn't have to obey. She had a choice. But would that be enough? That night, Fatima could hardly sleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of what had happened, of what she was about to do. The weight of her decision pressed down on her chest, but it wasn't the same kind of suffocating weight that had held her captive all these years. This was different. This was the weight of possibility, of freedom. But it was also the weight of fear, the fear of the unknown, the fear of what would happen if Sheikh Yusuf found out, if his men came looking for her. She had no plan, no escape route. She had nothing but a desire to be free. In the quiet of the night, as the sounds of the household faded, Fatima lay awake on the small bed she shared with her husband, listening to the muffled sounds of Sheikh Yusuf's deep breathing. He was asleep, oblivious to the fact that his wife, his possession, was already plotting her escape. Fatima turned her head toward him, staring at the figure lying next to her. He didn't care about her. Not really. She was a thing to him, a tool to serve his needs. And as she watched him, a surge of anger rose within her chest. For years, she had been his wife in name only, his servant in reality. His eyes, always cold and calculating, never saw her as a person, as an individual. They had never seen Fatima. But tonight, in the stillness of the room, she made herself a promise. She would not let him take any more from her. She was not his possession. She was her own person, and she would fight for the life that had been denied to her. The next morning, as the sun rose and the world outside Sheikh Yusuf's estate stirred to life, Fatima moved quickly. She couldn't waste time. Every minute spent here brought her closer to the possibility of being caught, closer to being dragged back into that life. But she couldn't escape without a plan, and Layla had to be part of that plan. Fatima found her in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew, her face pale, her eyes still filled with the same fear that had been there the day Fatima first spoke to her about leaving. Layla had been quiet since their conversation, but Fatima knew she had to act fast. They couldn't waste any more time. "Layla," Fatima whispered, taking a step closer to her. "We can't stay here anymore." Layla paused, her eyes darting around, making sure no one was listening. Fatima had learned over the years that the walls in the house had ears. They had eyes everywhere. Even the simplest conversation could be overheard, and one wrong word could have consequences they could never undo. "I know," Layla replied, her voice shaking. "But where will we go? We have no money, no way out." Fatima took a deep breath, feeling her pulse quicken. The plan had to come together now. They had to take that first step. "We can go to the safe house," Fatima said. "Zara can help us. She's been planning this for years. She'll get us out. We just have to be ready." Layla didn't answer immediately. Fatima saw the hesitation in her eyes, the fear that gripped her heart, the fear of being caught, the fear of what would happen to them if they failed. "You don't have to come if you're not ready," Fatima said, her voice soft but firm. "But I can't stay here. Not after what happened. I can't live like this anymore." Layla's hands trembled as she set down the spoon and turned to face Fatima. There was a long pause, the kind of silence that stretched for an eternity, until finally, Layla spoke. "I'll go with you," she whispered. "I can't stay here either. I can't keep living like this." Fatima's heart fluttered in her chest. This was it. They were finally going to take action. They were finally going to break free. But as Fatima turned to walk out of the kitchen, a shadow passed across the doorway. She froze. Sheikh Yusuf stood there, framed in the doorway, his eyes narrow with suspicion. He had been watching them. His presence loomed over them like a dark cloud. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. Fatima's stomach dropped. She couldn't let him know. She couldn't let him see the fear that was rising in her chest. "We were just talking," Fatima said, her voice steady despite the panic that surged inside her. "Is there a problem?" Sheikh Yusuf didn't move. He simply stared at her, his gaze cold, calculating. "No problem," he said, his eyes flicking over to Layla before settling back on Fatima. "But remember your place, Fatima." His voice was a low growl. "You're not to be seen or heard unless I command it. Understand?" Fatima nodded, trying to steady her breath. She couldn't let him see her fear. "Yes, Sheikh," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. He lingered for a moment longer, then turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the hall. Fatima let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Layla looked at her, wide-eyed. "What if he finds out?" she whispered. "What if we're caught?" "We won't be," Fatima said, her voice more confident than she felt. "We'll leave when he's gone. Tonight, we'll slip out before anyone notices. We have to." The day dragged on, the hours stretching endlessly as they went about their work. Fatima could barely focus. Every sound, every shadow seemed to bring danger closer. But she kept moving, her mind racing, planning. By evening, as the sun set behind the walls of Sheikh Yusuf's house, Fatima knew the time had come. He had left for the mosque, and the house was silent. She grabbed Layla's hand, her heart hammering in her chest. "We can do this," she whispered. "We just have to get out. Now." They crept to the back of the house, moving quickly through the corridors. Every step felt like it could be their last, but Fatima didn't stop. She couldn't. The door to freedom was just ahead. But as they reached the door, a voice called out from behind them. Fatima. Fatima froze, her blood running cold. It was Sheikh Yusuf's voice. Fatima. She froze. That voice, Sheikh Yusuf's voice, was like a dagger to her chest. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat as the air around her grew thick with dread. She didn't dare turn around, didn't dare look back. If she did, she might never be able to leave. Layla's hand tightened around hers, and Fatima could feel her trembling. She didn't say a word. There was no need. The fear was mutual, the danger all too real. Fatima slowly inched her body towards the door, her fingers brushing against the cold wood, praying, begging that the door would be unlocked. Fatima. This time his voice was louder, more forceful, more demanding. She could hear his footsteps approaching, heavy, deliberate. Fatima's mind raced. What now? If she turned, if she gave in to the fear, she would be caught. She would be dragged back into that life, into his grasp, into the life that had almost killed her the night she gave birth. No. Her breath hitched in her throat, and she forced herself to turn the handle. The door creaked open, barely a sliver, but it was enough. The darkness beyond it was her only refuge. Fatima! She felt his hand brush against her shoulder just as she pushed the door open, her pulse pounding in her ears. But before he could grab her, she stepped through the door, pulling Layla with her. She didn't wait for the menacing voice to call again. She ran. The desert air hit her like a shock to the system, the cool breeze cutting through the heavy night. But Fatima didn't stop. She ran as fast as her legs could carry her, her heart in her throat, fear, anger, and hope swirling inside her like a storm. Behind her, she heard Sheikh Yusuf shout, angry, desperate. The sound of his men's footsteps, of their pursuit, grew louder with every passing second. She knew they wouldn't let her get away that easily. But the call of freedom was too strong. She couldn't go back. She wouldn't go back. The moonlight bathed the desert in silver, and Fatima couldn't see where she was running, but it didn't matter. All she knew was that she had to run. Layla was beside her, gasping for breath, but running just as hard, her face pale with fear. Fatima reached for her hand, squeezing it for reassurance. They ran together, driven by the same urgency, the same desire to escape, to be free. The wind whipped against their faces, but they couldn't stop. After what felt like hours, Fatima and Layla stumbled upon the edge of the village. Fatima had been here before, though she barely remembered the place, a small, quiet stretch of land that led into the wilderness. It was the last path to freedom, but it was also the most dangerous. She looked back. The distant torches from Sheikh Yusuf's men flickered in the dark, growing closer. Her breath came out in ragged gasps, her heart heavy in her chest. But she wouldn't stop. Not now. We're almost there, Layla. Fatima's voice was strained but determined. Layla nodded, but her eyes were filled with terror. They'll find us. We can't stop, Fatima replied, her voice firm. We just need to keep going. If we can make it to the hills, they won't be able to track us. Layla nodded, her hand gripping Fatima's. Fatima didn't know where the strength was coming from, but it was there. She could feel the fire of it burning inside her. The night sky was endless above them, the air thin and dry. The horizon stretched wide in front of them, an open world that promised something they had never had, the chance to choose, the chance to be free, the chance to not live under his control. But just as they reached the base of the hills, the sound of shouting erupted from behind them. Sheikh Yusuf's men had caught up. Stop! One of them shouted. Stop right there! Fatima's pulse surged. There was no time. We have to make it, Fatima whispered, her heart racing. The hills were so close now. The night was their only chance. With the sound of pursuit growing louder, Fatima turned to Layla. Go! She shouted. Layla hesitated, fear clouding her expression. What if they? We'll make it! Fatima shouted, cutting her off. Trust me. And with that, they pushed forward. The sound of the men's footsteps was almost deafening now. Fatima's legs burned, but she didn't stop. The hills were within reach. They had to make it. This was their moment. But then, as they reached the base of the hill, something hard struck Fatima's side. She stumbled, her body crashing to the ground. She heard Layla scream, but her vision blurred. The men had caught up to them. One of them had grabbed her. No, Fatima gasped, trying to push him off, but she was too weak. Her strength had been drained from the running, the fear, the sheer will to escape. You're not going anywhere, the man hissed, his grip tightening on her arm. Layla was beside her, tears streaming down her face. "Fatima," she cried, "please." But just as she thought it was over, a loud shout cut through the night air, a sharp, commanding voice. "Let her go." The voice was firm, powerful. Fatima's heart skipped a beat. Zara. She didn't know how, but Zara had arrived just in time. The man who had grabbed Fatima paused, looking confused. "Who are you?" he asked, stepping back. "I said, let her go." Zara's voice was unyielding. There was no fear in it. There was only strength. Before the man could respond, Zara moved forward with a swift motion, knocking the man aside with a force Fatima hadn't expected. Zara wasn't alone. Two other women appeared from the shadows, moving quickly, grabbing Fatima and Layla's arms and pulling them away. "We're getting out of here," Zara said, her voice low but sure. Fatima's vision cleared as she was lifted to her feet, and the weight of what had just happened hit her all at once. The men were still coming, but Zara and the other women were already pulling them up the hill, their speed almost inhuman. The hills were their salvation, their only way out. Fatima felt Zara's hand grip hers as they ran, and for the first time she believed they could make it. They were free, but Sheikh Yusuf wasn't done yet. He would come for them, but not tonight.